Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at E-Residency of Estonia. If you're a globetrotting digital nomad, expat, freelancer, or somebody with a business, whether that's just you or an aspiring unicorn like some of the many other unicorns that have come out of Estonia, then look at E-Residency of Estonia the next time you're thinking about where to establish your business. E-Residency is a digital identity issued by the Republic of Estonia, which is in the European Union, to foreign nationals, that means non-Estonians, giving them digital access to the country's advanced online infrastructure and open business environment. And when I say advanced, I mean advanced. They've been doing digital for decades. E-residents can start a company 100% online from wherever they are in the world, run it remotely, open business bank accounts, and even submit their annual reports, all with their electronic ID card. It's literally international business without borders for location-independent entrepreneurs, perfect for the About Abroad audience. The next time you're thinking about where to establish your business, look at E-Residency of Estonia via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by my friend Egor from the beautiful island of Bali, Indonesia. You've probably heard of Bali, or maybe if you listen to this podcast, you've been there and spent many, many months there. But Egor's story is quite different. He's actually made it his home for over a decade now and has some hilarious stories to tell about living in Bali, but also just some really practical information about how to make Bali your home for 6 months, a year, a decade, whatever it may be. And we just get back down into why it is that Bali is so popular around the world. It's one of the hot spots for digital nomads, probably the number one hotspot for digital nomads, and a growing expat community and beautiful culture and jungles and beaches and just so much to explore there that we hadn't really gotten into much on this show, because typically when it comes up in the sense of someone just kind of passing through there, spending a month in Chengdu and then just moving on. So I really wanted to dive into Bali and see what it is that makes this one of those places that everyone around the world knows where it is and wants to go spend some time there. So Egor does a great job taking us inside Bali and talking about his experience calling it home. Please help me in welcoming Egor to About Abroad. Egor, how's it going? Welcome to About Abroad.
Hey, Chase. Good to hear you. Thanks a lot.
Man, it's been a really long time. I feel like we've known each other for quite a while and communicate off to a good start. Communicate very often via email, but it's rare that we get to hop on a call together, and even more rare that we get to talk about something as exciting as life in Bali.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like I've known you for ages, but we've only really spent probably less than a few hours together in person, and definitely an equal amount on video. But hey, that's our current situation, and it's as good as it gets. I'm happy to be here and sharing our life journeys.
That's right. Actually, you mentioned the couple hours together in person. That was several years ago. We met up in the first time we met in the Pyrenees at a conference, and we did some barbecuing and over a fire with our respective CEOs at the time, right?
Yeah, the beautiful event in Spain, and it's an amazing experience. I have great memories of it, working and traveling combined.
Not a bad way to kick off the friendship, for sure. So that was a lot of fun. Well, I'm really looking forward to the conversation today for multiple reasons. One of which is you're living in Bali, which is, I believe, the place that over the course of doing this show that has probably come up the most, because I've had so many digital nomads on here and it's like the digital nomad hotspot. But you have a bit of a different story because you actually live there and have been there for quite a long time. So I don't actually know the background of it. I don't know how long you've been there, how you got there, if I'm actually correct in saying that you fully lived there, but that's my perception. And the other piece to this is that I have somehow never been to Bali. So I literally know very little except what everybody tells me. So I have a ton to learn. I imagine the audience does too. And I'm sure you're the perfect person to fill in the blanks. So that's where I'm coming from in this conversation. And I thought it would be a great kind of like a way to introduce yourself and kind of let the people know who you are and how you got there. If you could just kind of back up and kind of say where you started in life and how you kind of came here to be in Bali.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I hope after this recording that yourself and some of the listeners will be more inclined to come to Bali, but also to understand that it's not really for everyone to necessarily live the way I've been living here. So just to kind of roll back in time, I am Russian, but I grew up in London, and I was graduating in 2008, which was the year of the financial crisis. It was extremely difficult to get a job. I had a business degree, and London is very competitive, especially in business and sales jobs. And so I started to really look for volunteer positions at that time, just to get myself busy with something. And I got recruited by a coral conservation charity, which is very different from business or any of the companies that I was looking at, like, BPs and Shells. And but I really liked what they are in for, saving the world's natural resources, especially something as fragile as coral. But they have marketing department, and I was recruited to do sales and marketing and events. And essentially, I wasn't getting paid, but I was promoting these expeditions to exotic countries and locations, specifically to gap year students who would want to go and experience, a new country, but then also get some certification through that. And I wasn't getting paid for it, but I was learning a ton, and I fell in love, in theory, of Asia without ever having been there before. I just love the tropics, I love all the pictures, and that whole sales story, was constantly in my mind. So I was like, well, if these guys found me useful, and I really felt like my sales and marketing degree kind of helped in the world of sustainability, as opposed to going to some, petrochemical industry, which was meant to be my path. I thought that maybe by going to Asia, I would maybe actually be able to find similar companies like this that may find me valuable, as opposed to, just getting constant, failures through all of my CV applications in London for the corporate world. And so I just wrote to a couple of friends of mine. One of them was living in Thailand, and I went over for a couple of months. And so I actually ended up meeting people who lived there. And I was like, wow, how do you live here? How can you live in such a beautiful place? I love Thailand. I traveled through the country, and some of them had, a lot of them had various stories, but most of them had something similar, that they had a way to earn money remotely without relying on Thailand. Now, back then, remote wasn't the thing, but these were mainly designers, like creative people that just needed their device. And I was like, well, this is not really what my skill set is. So I went back to London, and I just made myself a goal that I need to move to Asia, and I'll find a job, no matter like how, but I'll find a job, because I can't do it remotely. So I'll have to go to a country that's slightly more developed. And some of my friends were in Bali, and they told me, oh, look, it's such a small island, but there are like 14 international schools. It's very good infrastructure. You should come here. And so I made that goal come true. I bought a ticket, just a one-way ticket to Bali to see what it's like. And 2 weeks later, I got a sales and marketing job at an international school. Funny enough, they did have a sales and marketing department, but a year later, I left that, and I fell in love with Bali so much that I was finding for ways to stay, and then I rolled on to other things to do. But so since 2009, I have been here pretty much full time.
Wow. I didn't even realize it. We have so many little things in common there. I also graduated with a business degree in '08, right in the middle of the financial crisis. And I was going into the financial industry, and it was a very odd time to be graduating. Prospects were thin, and it was not super invigorating to look at the job options. I'm glad it worked out for you, and you landed in such a cool place. That's a lot more fortunate than a lot of people that landed that were looking for something in '08. Even if you weren't getting paid, you ended up in a cool place.
The funny thing is, like, I didn't know anything about Bali except from reading about it, and reading about it like very deeply, right? So I pretty much like researched every single thing, and I realized, okay, there are 3 job agencies. They need some foreigners. I probably have a good chance of printing out my CVs and just doing a round of these job centers rather than doing the same in London. And that's how I got my job. And back then, everything unraveled very fast. But yeah, the school was with a sustainable approach. So it's actually like that. It's called Green School. It's now pretty much an international brand that have schools all over the world. But this was the first green school. And so I just felt really useful with my skills, and I knew that whatever I was doing, it wasn't killing the environment or producing some plastic products. We were breeding a new type of generation that would be focused on sustainability, sort of like global citizens. And I really felt useful. But I grew so many connections during that time that it didn't become an issue for me to find a way to stay here after I quit.
Yeah, the green school is something that just came across my radar recently, actually. And I know it wasn't like, this isn't like a big focus of your life. It was a short period overall, but it's a very cool concept. And actually, I wonder if you could elaborate on it a little bit for somebody who's not familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's a alternative education school. An alternative meaning that they have a gravitas towards other subjects that conventional schools don't have, such as green studies, global awareness. A lot of their education is based on the Rudolf Steiner system, which is used. It's similar to Montessori, but Rudolf Steiner is like a separate system, and none of those schools have been sort of like accepted on the international arena. It's really for those experimental families that don't want their kids to go through conventional schooling. And so Green School was really striving, along with many other schools, to be internationally recognized. And to become that, you need to have a certain percentage of conventional subjects like mathematics, history, and science within the daily timetable. And so they had strike this balance, and the Cambridge certification body had been coming over to Green School year after year to see whether they're ready to be internationally proclaimed. And so Green School, when I was there for the first time, became internationally recognized alternative education school, right? And so that basically propelled it to a next level where they increased massively the tuition fees, and they started to attract basically affluent families that have property in Southeast Asia, and they don't want their kids to just go to like halogen sort of lit classrooms. Green School is all entirely made of bamboo. All the classrooms, they don't have any right. We're 90-degree angles. Everything is curvy. It's all around these gardens where the kids can go and learn to grow their own vegetables and then go eat them at lunch. And back then, the school was only, I think, there were 120 kids, and by the time I left, it was 420. So I'd spent 2 years there, and it basically like 3x in the amount of kids that they had there. But the atmosphere was really something special. The kids, they are very open. A lot of kids that came, they had like dyslexia problems or some other learning disability issues. And through being in Green School and in that open and collaborative environment where it's really sort of community centric, they ended up being much more relaxed with their issues that they had in first world countries and in conventional schools. And there had been studies on the Green School effect on those kind of kids. Green School had a lot of supporting teachers just for kids to open up. Experiential learning is when, say, they do mathematics, and instead of just coming to the whiteboard, they literally bring in 5 coconuts and put them together and be like, how many is that? And then take one away. It's really like hands-on, and a lot of community fusion, right? So they would bring in the local children to teach them on like kite making. And so it was very unique. It was a very unique experience. And to this day, Green School is, it's a very proclaimed place. And now they've launched schools in New Zealand, I think, and also in California. But my role essentially was to bring in new kids. And the way I would do that is I launched a sister organization inside of Green School called Green Camp, where you could have children that are not part of the curriculum, maybe coming for a few months to Bali or even a few weeks, to come in and spend some time in this beautiful space in the jungle, in these massive bamboo structures. Like, to give you a perspective, the central building of the school, it was comprised of 9 spirals of bamboo, with a total length of 30 kilometers of bamboo. So it's a real sort of like bamboo palace. And so other kids could experience that for coming for 1 or 2 days. We would sell these day programs for them, and then they would be like, "Mom, that school is so awesome. How can we? I want to go to a school like that." And that would be essentially a sales funnel for us to get more kids into the school. But for me, it was just it's totally different from my life in London, and yeah, it was an amazing experience. I totally recommend anyone to just visit the location here in Bali for Green School.
Yeah, it's such a cool concept, and I think there's also, isn't there an element of it where you can you could move between, like you could move the kids between the schools, like if for a family that has home in Bali and a home somewhere else, like they could move back and forth kind of seamlessly, or am I incorrect there?
Could be. I left the school in 2010 or 11, and
Yeah, so it's been a while.
after that, I believe they had lots of awesome programs.
Yeah.
Maybe something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason I ask is I think it's like one of these emerging things that you and I come across a lot in the future of work, remote work kind of thing, is like people are getting more access to freedom of location. And one of the things that quote unquote holds a lot of people back is like, oh, but I have kids in school. And so I'm seeing these organizations trying to adapt to that and find solutions for the mobile family, which is a growing demographic. And so I believe I read something about the Green School really trying, they're very forward thinking. They're thinking outside the box, and it seems like something they would try to tackle. So anyway, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about this, and it came up here unexpectedly, so I thought I'd ask. But what's wild to me though is like you found Bali at a time, 12, 13 years ago. I don't know that it was the household name then that it is today. I mean, like I said, this is probably the place that comes up the most on this show as just a place where people have gone and spent months. I ask people, where's your favorite place in the world? Oh, I love Bali. But I don't think it was that the case when you discovered it, over a decade ago. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Bali was not in the international arena, but when I got here, I realized that I'm like a latecomer, because
Mm.
apparently good stuff happened in the 80s. And
Oh,
now
okay.
with ATMs and roads, and it kind of already felt like I was late back then, only to realize that something massive is just about to happen, because Bali's population is 4 million, and when I arrived, they were experiencing around about 1.5 million tourists per year. So still mostly local. And just before the pandemic, I believe the amount of tourists was 50% over Bali's population, annual amount of
Wow.
tourists coming in. So an explosion, of course, driven by social media and the whole, co-working, remote work movement. But I was there. Present on the first sort of like brainstorm, just on the whiteboard about co-working by one of the Green School parents, and they went off to actually open rent out a place in central Ubud, where they said, "Hey, you can come in and work, and you can like have membership." It really seemed really odd at that time, but fast forward a few years, that was the first co-working space in Southeast Asia. It's called Ubud.
Oh yeah, it's world famous now.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
Green School alumni parents. Yeah.
You were in on the ground level. Did you get like any shares or anything? Because that would have been nice to get in on the ground floor of, I think.
I did not buy in. I did not buy into the whole story. I was like, how can you like work with people you don't know? Super strange. Like, I understand working from home, and then of course when the co-working spaces are shut, like right now, I just wish I could go and work in a non-home environment, just to give that that opportunity for people that think that working from home is a bit too much for them. But I just it seemed like it's not going to work at
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
time.
It's funny. I thought the same thing about co-living when I first heard about it, and I was totally wrong. Like I was like, nobody's going to do that. Like people want their own space and you got to work. And I don't know if the co-living thing is really going to like blow up. And I'm just like totally wrong. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know if I was like really hardcore on that. It was just my general gut feeling like, I don't know. And yeah, totally incorrect on that route. But
same.
it's super interesting that you're there.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers, so they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode.
How do you feel like you're a local now? I mean, how does that, you talk about the explosion in popularity, and when you see your kind of home plastered across Instagram and tons of people kind of coming through, and I wonder, as someone who's been there a long time and sort of before the boom, even if you weren't there in the 80s when it was really unknown, like what is your kind of honest assessment of where it was and where it is now? Has it been a net positive, or how do you feel about it?
For me, the people ask me like, why are you in Bali? What do you like the most about it? Yeah, of course you have, beautiful nature, but you have beautiful nature in other parts of Southeast Asia too. Similar, canyons and exotic flowers and all of this. But really what makes it unique for me are the people and the culture here. First off, they have managed to preserve their sovereignty, the culture, and their traditions and ceremonies the way they have been for the last 120 years. And that hasn't changed a bit, except now they have a little bit of like, plastic inside of their ceremonies, and the costumes that they wear are maybe polyester and not all cotton, but everything else is exactly the same, right? So you're kind of like transported into this prehistoric, well, not prehistoric, but like something really ancient. And you can be a part of it on a daily basis, especially living in central Bali, where I am, up in the hills, place called Ubud. It's full of Balinese people here, and it's very authentic. And through their culture and religion, it's Hindu. It's called Adama Hindu, right? So it's really like Hindu based, but it's their own fusion of animism and Hinduism. And when I say animism, that they believe, in that there is spirit in everything, the spirit in the water, the spirit of, the trees, and all of the different statues and figures they have. And it's a island of 1,000 temples. So there is meaning in everything. They put meaning in everything. They really care about how are they going to be perceived, whether the way they're saying something or addressing themselves to the foreigner, are they being polite or impolite? And there's just a lot of this awareness about everything they're doing. And of course, they're, as Hinduists, being Hinduists, they're true believers in karma as well. So, just being in that environment with those kind of people just, felt for me completely right, and very soft place where I'm not going to be judged, but it's also going to sort of remind me of some really important values in life. For the Balinese, many of them are wealthy and they can send their kids, to study in the US or anywhere abroad, and they do that. But all those kids come back because they think that, well, most important is just family and being together and preserving the land that you have. And this is really amazing to see, So in terms of values, few of them have, oh, I really want to get like a flashy car. All they want to have is just as many ceremonies as possible with their family and just to eat as much food as possible. And that's all they really want. And so, what's all the foreigners that were coming here back in like end of 90s, I guess 2000, would get met by this culture, and you cannot resist but to study it with more detail. And of course, you need to learn language. By learning language, you get sort of closer to the culture. And so we were all like, everyone that's been in Bali for 10 years or arrived here, like, before that time, really merge and integrate well into the culture and spend time with them. But, with nomads, unfortunately, what I have noticed in the last few years that, very few people who'd lived here for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years would speak any word of Indonesian, and the places that they would stay, you might have heard of places like Canggu or some other places. Lots of Balinese have moved out from there because it was just becoming uneconomically viable for them to stay there. Land had become so expensive, so it's just all hotels, and then stuff coming from other islands to serve it. To serve all that environment, right? So they would be coming from Muslim islands and Christian islands, and so Balinese have kind of moved out and shifted north. So most of the co-working and the nomadic scene happens down south, where local arrivals don't really have the opportunity, unless they really look for it, to be a part of this beautiful, vibrant, colorful, super interesting culture. And I find that a bit unfortunate. And, I would just love for, more people that are coming to Bali for a few years to kind of get to know the Balinese a little bit more than just, beautiful Instagram pictures on, a canyon, because just Bali is just way more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So where would someone go if you mentioned Ubud, which is around where you are, if I'm not mistaken, and Chengdu, which I think are like two of the places that a lot of people, that if you know anything about Bali, you may know those two names, and maybe not much more beyond that. And it sounds like you're describing Ubud being more of like a bit more local feeling, and Chengdu being more of like the nomad scene. If I'm incorrect, correct me, please. And then where might be a couple other places on the island that fall into those two categories, so that someone who wants the nomad scene can go there, or someone who wants to get more of the local, authentic Balinese feel could head to that locale.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, the nomad scene has just been such a massive economic boost to the island that everywhere is pretty much nomad friendly. But Ubud is definitely with a place that has the least amount of events and sort of entrepreneurial circles than Canggu. So if you're looking to come out into Bali and build I don't know, a blockchain dApp or something, or meet like-minded people, there's more chance of you meeting those in Canggu, right? So that's the tech hub, or the blockchain people are there. The social media influencer tribe is there as well. Ubud is the healing and detox center. There are two rivers that meet here. Ubud itself actually derives from an Indonesian word, which is obat, which means medicine. So, it's been a powerful place, energetically, for ages, but it also has a big number of co-working spaces. So if you're a yogi, that's also, working remotely and interested in a bit of a more chilled vibes, then, you could definitely come to Ubud and sort of experience all of that, but you don't have the beach. So if you're a nomad that loves to surf and, loves to have the beach, then there's another place that's called Jimbaran. And Jimbaran is just south from the airport. And it's on a peninsula. The whole peninsula is called the Bukit, and that's a whole different atmosphere there. It's like you just literally arrived to another island. By the way, all these three places, Ubud, Canggu, and Bukit, they are completely different places. Bali, you travel half an hour and the scenery changes completely. So right now I'm standing looking at this super lush, jungle, but in Bukit, you'll be standing looking at dried red sand, because they have very small rainfall there as well, and it's super hot, but very beautiful waves, some of the best waves in the world. So that's full of surfers. Again, a ton of really good places to eat and lots of places to stay, and of course, co-working in every corner. Those are kind of the three main hubs. But the north of Bali is starting to develop slowly too, and there are some things to see there. There's a beautiful fishing village called Ahmed. It's very colorful, but it's especially known for its black sand. It's very close to the volcano, Mount Agung, and black sand has healing properties as well. It has a lot of negative ions, so it's like a really nice kind of place just to go and relax, Ahmed. And we also have these party islands called the Gili Islands, which is basically like the Ibiza of Asia. So if you're into like, full moon parties, that's just an hour and a half away on a speedboat. And it's not Bali, but it's like everyone who comes to Bali goes to the Gili Islands as well.
Yeah, it's part of the experience. Yeah, it's similar. You mentioned Ibiza, and it's kind of like that in Spain. It's like it feels. I'm in Valencia, and it's just I think it's a 40-minute flight for about $10 to Ibiza, and you're like, it doesn't feel much like it feels like you've just been transported to a whole other world.
Yeah.
What it's you mentioned something that triggered a thought in my mind that's very interesting to me. There's a ton of islands, and you mentioned like people coming from other islands. Like Indonesia's got, I don't know, I could be wrong, hundreds or thousands. Like there's a lot of islands, but Bali is the one that everybody knows, and you even have these surrounding islands, like you mentioned, where people are coming with their different religions and different cultures and stuff. So it's obviously very distinct and unique. What do you think it is about Bali that sets it apart from the rest? And not to ask you to say why is Bali better than the rest, but I mean, why is it that we all know Bali and the next island in either direction, the majority of the world's population has no idea what it is?
Right. Well, when the conversion to the Muslim religion was to Islam was taking place, those who didn't want to convert and went Hindu, they arrived here. So Indonesia has something like 14,000 islands in its archipelago. Bali is the only Hindu island, right? So that already sets it aside. Number two, I'd say like the modern day infrastructure is the best infrastructure out of all the islands there are, except of course maybe the capital city Jakarta, which is highly polluted. So you have the convenience of having your ATMs, having amazing fiber optic Wi-Fi, and everything. It's just a convenient way of living in Asia. Even like places in Thailand that I'd lived in, a few places there, they don't have such an infrastructure. And it's international airport, in proximity to Australia. You have like international flights coming in directly to Bali. Like you don't need to stop over at another place, and you just can't have that, right? It's again part of the infrastructure that brings people here. But once you've arrived here, it's the culture really and the people for me. I'm not saying that like people on other islands are maybe less interesting or more interesting. In fact, I was very surprised to see how amazing people are in Java and just like really, really welcoming. But I think like those things combined and, just a lot of interesting foreigners that you'd meet from all walks of life, right? So everyone who lives here for a while, they all have like an interesting story to tell, like what brought you here? So you're constantly surrounded by just interesting characters. And as I'm just comparing myself to London, going somewhere to a social event, everyone was kind of like have similar lives. And then I'd pick out a couple of really interesting people that I would connect with. But here it's kind of different. Like everyone is a wild card. And that for me also is definitely one of strong attractive points. The expat community here is just really vibrant. Probably like Costa Rica could compare to that in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's something that's like a common theme amongst people on this show. And I certainly relate with that. There is just something about like being in a room filled with a bunch of people who are all sort of wild cards, and you know that you don't know what the next story is going to be. Like somebody's coming from some place that you're like, I have never even thought about that before. And it adds a little bit of flavor to life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. A lot of crazy people as well in the mix, but I love crazy people.
The expat community always has like wild card could be the understatement of the year right there with some of the people you meet along the way. You're like, man, I know there's something shady underneath the curtain here. We just haven't gotten to it yet. We'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's all really interesting, and I think like one of the things that we love to cover on this show is like the how, like logistically, how does someone make the move to Bali? Because I imagine like any place, there are rules around how long you can be there, on which visa, how can you enter and leave, and I always tell my guests, like, I'm not asking you to be a visa pro or anything, but I wonder if you could just shed a little bit of light on like what you know about just showing up and staying in Bali. And then if you have any tips for people that want to stay longer, because I know it may not be the same as when you first arrived. Suppose it could have changed, but you have the experience of like showing up to a foreign country, getting work, and then staying and living permanently there. So, I mean, it's not the most typical of stories when it comes to digital nomads, people traveling around the world. It's actually quite unique. So, I'm very eager to hear a little bit about your experience in that regard.
Yeah, well, Indonesia is at the moment very friendly, has very friendly immigration policies, and you can right off the bat get a 6 month temporary resident stay. It's a social cultural visa. So if you're taking up a course to learn something here, maybe, I don't know, like pottery class or maybe even yoga, that goes down as like integrating into the culture. And you get that visa for 6 months. You typically have a local sponsor, and there are some visa agencies that can provide that sponsor. If you actually don't know anyone in person, that sponsorship is just as easy as a letter of recommendation that they would email you. And you can then go ahead and renew that visa once it expires. It's very hard to renew it all the time, nonstop, like for years and years and years, because one of the embassies, when you do your visa run, say you're going to Malaysia to do a visa run, they'll be like, well, you've applied for 6 months visas for 4 years in a row. You should get a residency. To get a residency, you need to open up a company, or you need to get sponsored by somebody, or like own a business here, those kind of things. So I've been iterating, and I've had some business visas. I had like temporary work permit. All of those are very easy to get, as opposed to like looking at the same applications for Thailand or India, which is what I'd looked at in the past, and did spend some time in India as well. It's way harder. But if you have the money, it's very easy to do it in Bali. So talk about money, that it's not that cheap as a lot of people think. Even though it's a developing country and it's Indonesia, the prices in Bali are way higher than they are on other islands of Indonesia, and that's a setback for some of the nomads. They just find it like more cost effective to be in Thailand. So to give you an idea, an application for a visa like this is around $300. And then you pay every month $70 to maintain this visa for 6 months. And then you have to fly out and stay somewhere for like 3-4 days, Malaysia or Singapore. So that's already an expense. And plus, accommodation starts from like 500 to like 700 for one person. That's like standard dollars, which is it's pretty decent if you think about it. It's quite expensive if you think about it compared to Thailand or Indonesia, but it's pretty much nothing for the size of property you get if you were to compare it with, I don't know, into Europe in my case. So visa-wise, it's pretty easy, but staying here, you're still looking at considering your monthly budget, because it's not that cheap as some of the other places in Asia.
Yeah, that's really good to know, I think, because some people might have traveled in Cambodia or Vietnam or Thailand or something and gotten a feel for, okay, yeah, maybe I can live on X, and when you factor in the visa cost, the visa run, the fact that the rent's a little bit higher, it does add up quickly.
Yeah, totally. And I think also what happens is that it filters through some people that aren't really maybe that serious, or they're not really maybe business minded, which is what the tech community loves, that you're constantly discussing new projects and startups and ideas. And I think that's why you are able to find so many interesting people here, who actually like doing something. And I mean, in Goa, when I'd spend some time, everyone is just interested to go and see the sunset and like meditate and then go to sleep. So just a different kind of pace of life as well. So you need to maintain that to be able to afford living here.
It's so true. Do you know, you mentioned like a couple things about like that made me think you have to get that visa ahead of time. Like you don't get to Indonesia, just you can't just arrive as a tourist and then figure out the visa thing when you get there. You secure it ahead of time and you renew it as a backup question to that. You renew it outside of Bali or Indonesia.
Yeah, you can do both, right? It's actually cheaper to arrive with this visa in your passport already. So you could contact, via Facebook or any kind of Google search visa agency in Bali, contact them remotely, and then actually my first visa, they had processed it back in 2009. And only when I arrived to Bali, I went into the office to pay them. So I was like, wow, that's a good start. Like people don't trust me like that in London. I have to pay up front, So there are agencies that can do this for you remotely. However, Bali has an agreement with, I think, most countries of the world for a free 30-day visa, which is stamped on arrival. So once you get here and that's expiring, you can actually walk into one of these agencies and say to them, look, I'd like to get sponsored for this social culture visa. I'm going to fly out to Malaysia. Can I have the letter? And so you could process it here, but you still have to fly out to have it physically stamped in the embassy.
Okay. And then so you go to your local consulate or embassy in Malaysia or Singapore or somewhere and actually get the renewal visa there.
Yeah, that's where they would stamp it, but you can prepare all documents in Bali with the help of local agents.
Cool. Is it pretty straightforward? I mean, is it one of those things where like some visas are like, I got a visa in Ecuador, which was totally just like, you just have to basically check a bunch of boxes on a piece of paper and pay $200 and you get your visa for 6 months. It's not like a question, it is more just like a little procedure you have to do. And others where it's more like you're applying and they're like, yeah, we'll let you know. And it takes weeks or months. And it's definitely a little bit nerve wracking because if it doesn't work out, you could be really screwed. Where does Bali fall on that spectrum in this regard?
It's pretty easy. The main difference I'd say is that they want you to have an outbound ticket and enough funds in your bank statement, which is, I believe, something like $1,500. So if you've got that, so obviously, if you don't have that, then they may ask additional questions like, why are you going to Bali? Are you going to work there? How are you going to sustain yourself? So if you've got those two boxes checked, enough funds in your account and an outbound ticket from Bali, then it's as easy as checking boxes.
Sweet. That's great to know. Are they talking about any kind of like a digital nomad visa? Are they trying to profit off of this? Like there's a lot of countries that are saying like, actually we attract a lot of remote workers and digital nomads. Like that wasn't a big part of the global population before, but now it is. And we want our piece of the pie. So they're developing new visas for this. And, Bali's like the digital nomad hubspot or hub of the world. So is that something that they're looking at? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I was also going to mention that it's been an ongoing conversation. I think no one's nailed it. I think the government changes and their interests change, but now in the pandemic, it's become more and more apparent that well, you've got people leaving to Barbados from Bali. They're going there because they just find it like more attractive and, they can stay there for a year. And so Indonesian government, has started to think about if we could have nomads come back to Bali, that's huge contribution to the economy of the whole country. And so now there are some developments in that area. There is a digital nomad visa conversation that's happening, and I should know some people who are part of that. I think they're still going through a lot of lobbying. I don't think it's been released or launched, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it in action because I've actually been following some of their activities on social media, and I can definitely see progress in that direction. So it could be very, very soon that we'll hear the news of it coming live.
Yeah, I'm very curious to follow along there because, for instance, Spain has just launched one. And so the visa that I'm on here is kind of like
it was set up for like retirees and pensioners. And so basically it's like, oh, if you're here on a fixed income, which in the past would have been a pension, or present, it still is used by retirees, then, you can come here. But it was developed years and years ago before remote work was a thing or whatever. So when you look at a remote worker, it's like, okay, basically the requirements are you're not a criminal, you're healthy, and you're not going to take a Spanish job. So you can come here as long as you have a fixed income coming from outside. And that fits the description of a foreign remote worker perfectly. So they let you, the government knows exactly what you're doing, but you're using a visa that wasn't really designed for what you're doing. So now they're developing this digital nomad visa, and they've just released it, and it's like really disadvantageous for the remote worker. People are all up in arms about it because they might have to switch their visa to this digital nomad visa, and it's like it's got a lot of drawbacks and like kind of frustrating elements to it. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see which governments get this right and which ones don't.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of PR involved in that, because obviously I've seen lots of publications about the Spanish nomad visa, which sounded great, but I obviously haven't looked into it in as much detail as you have. And the last weird information that I heard about Balinese, sorry, I keep saying Balinese, Indonesian digital nomad visa was that they would need to spend at least $100,000 a year, which to any normal person, that's like, why would I do that? Why would I commit to coming to Bali to spend $100,000?
Right.
It's even like cheaper to actually open a foreign-owned company and just to become a director of it. And you can do that like here, just as a fresh arrival as well on a tourist visa. You can just convert that by opening a company. It would be cheaper than going in a nomad visa where you have to spend 100,000. So I think they're still figuring out the terms and conditions, but it all sounds great on the PR side of things.
Yeah, it does. That's a cool thing though. So you can you can come as a foreigner and start a business there. And
yeah, no problem about that. You can't own any land or property as a foreigner, but your company can.
Gotcha.
And there are
Okay.
various types of companies that, as a foreign-owned company, you'd still need to have a partner, Indonesian partner involved. But a lot of people are going down that route because, like for example, I own a house here, but it's a 30-year lease. And so every day that I live here, the value of this house is going down. And of course, if I was able to buy that land, I would have had to put a much bigger investment up front, but at least that would have been growing as opposed to falling. So if you do have a foreign-owned company, you can buy it under your company name. And a lot of people are doing that.
Very interesting. Okay. I wanted to get to, because I knew that you had a home there, or at least you've referenced it when we've spoken before about like, oh yeah, my house here. So I figured it was yours. So you own it, but you have to lease the land basically.
Yeah. Previously you were able to do very long leases. So in the 90s, I think foreigners were taking out like 70, 80-year leases, which is pretty much like freehold. I mean, that's as long as, one generation can live in any property. And so now they've decreased it to, I believe, 25 years. So I actually had like 2 contracts and I extended it for a further 10 years. And that's why I have 30 now. But yeah, it was a very long process, I must say, and a super difficult one to build a house in Bali. But got there in the end.
Did you build it? You actually had it built?
Yeah, I mean, my story is a bit more twisted than that. I don't know, everything's just like more complicated in my life than it is with other people. But I actually like went to another island and I wanted to buy a wooden house. So I went into like jungle with an agent and we were looking at these houses that people were still living in, but they're like houses on stilts. So they cook food with a fire inside of this wooden house. And then they don't have any radio or any like Wi-Fi, it's just like one light bulb for like the entire village in this forest, right? Like 4-hour drive deep in the jungle. And I really like this house. So the family actually moved out because they wanted to live in something like a concrete building. So I've got this structure, which was very basic. And it's just like a house on stilts, but really big, tall columns. Like my columns are around about 45 centimeters in diameter and I think 5 meters high. And so I imported that into here after finding this house myself and then basically rearranged it a little bit. And so, yeah, that was super complicated. I mean, normally you'd come here and you meet a construction company, they give you a catalog and you'd be like, I want that one. And you'd have a house built in Bali in a year, but it didn't happen to me that way.
You took the road less traveled for sure, man. That is an epic story. That might make you the most interesting guest I've ever had on this show. Just that alone, that's insane.
It's probably
you
worth another
you
podcast for sure.
you imported a house from a neighboring island in Indonesia that was currently inhabited deep in a jungle and brought it to your island and put it on stilts. And that's mind
Yep.
blowing. I'm absolutely in love with that story. And what's your setup there like now? Is it still kind of I mean, you're there now. You have Wi-Fi, and so is it fairly primitive, or is it like no, you got
No,
all the luxuries?
I mean, we made it as luxurious as we possibly could, as possibly could afford. But it's quite big. It's 220 square meters of living space, and we have like a really modern kitchen, like a big sofa. And what we've done is like the house is on stilts, so that's because you've got wild animals, right, and live in the forest, and they could just like climb into people's bedrooms. So the houses are a bit raised, and so we raised it even higher on concrete stilts, and therefore we created two floors instead of just using the space underneath. And so all of underneath is just, it's like stone and granite and stuff like this, but upstairs is still very much like wooden, so you have this authentic experience. And you're still very much connected to sort of like where you are. There's a lot of super modern and minimalistic villas here in Bali, and we wanted to kind of like step away from that to preserve some of its authentic architecture, but it's like a blend. It's a very comfortable living space. We love it. It's definitely not for everyone. I would say it's an adventure experience house. That's what we like to call it. But yeah, it's been our home since December, and we love it. And it's a work in progress. I mean, like, I can't wait to move out from it, so I just stop spending money on it and working on it, because every day there's something that I want to improve, and it's just a never-ending love project with this place.
Yeah, they say that about your home. Like the two best days are when you buy it and when you sell it, because in between it'll never be perfect. You'll always find something else you can do, and then the day you sell it, you're like, oh well, now it's perfect. I got it set up for the next person, and that was actually the case for me as well. But that's an awesome story. I absolutely love that. It seems like you're really settled in for the long haul. I mean, the future. Who knows what the future holds? Nobody can probably say, yeah, I'm here for forever. But it seems like for you, Bali is home now. Is that fair to say?
Well, so we were building this house with the hope that we would get eventually a hotel license and move back to Europe, because I felt like I've been here for too long, and I like to experience different places. I have lived in a few different countries before moving out to Indonesia too, so I kind of feel I'm ready to move on. But now with the pandemic, it's become our home, and it's like permanent. So we are now constantly delaying our move back to Europe, and most likely now in 2022. So I don't think it's like I'm going to stay here forever, but Bali is definitely going to be my home, because by now this year I realized I'd spent here in this country more than in any other country
Wow.
in my life. So it's always going to be a home. Always one foot here, the heart is here, but we're ready to move on. And yeah, I'm excited to move back to Europe. That's a plan that I had before the pandemic, but obviously that's been slightly delayed.
I remember actually when we were talking about the barbecuing over a fire in the Pyrenees several years ago, maybe I don't know, 5 years ago or something. And I recall that kind of came up, like as you mentioned it right now. I was like, oh, I think you mentioned that before, that you were sort of interested in maybe making a move back to Europe. But that had escaped me until right now. But do you have a place in mind that like kind of calls to you, or like I'm trying to imagine moving back from the deep jungle in Bali to Europe, and like what like what would be the right transition point to go to? Because I think if you went back to London, it would be just like such a drastic change. So there's places that are in between. Where do you have your eye on?
Yeah, absolutely. London would be quite a shock for me. I mean, even if I go back to any massive city nowadays, I feel like I don't really belong there. So I'm kind of in betweeny of sort of city town, but that has smaller population. And so far, my eyes have fallen on Tallinn, capital of Estonia. My wife is from there as well, and I've been there a few times, and I liked it a lot. Also, it's like quite close to London, so I can fly, and it's pretty well connected. But it looks like we're going to be going there. It's extremely cold there, so obviously don't know how long it'll last, but at least we'll try it for a year or two and see how it goes. But so far, yeah, that's where we're heading to Tallinn, Estonia.
Wow, very cool. That's a nice little segue actually into kind of that's another remote work hub, and something we haven't gotten to yet is like you are one of the global leaders when it comes to the remote work movement, and as the person leading and organizing running remote, which is the largest remote work conference in the world. You're kind of right at the epicenter of all that, being a resident of Bali, running this conference, doing all the advocacy work you do there, and then also considering moving to Estonia, which is one of those other places where people can establish e-residency and all that. So yeah, you're kind of right in the crosshairs of this remote work world.
It's all through me. I mean, it's all really
Yeah.
like in veins, really. And of course, running remote started in Bali because it just totally made sense. I think even if I wasn't in Bali, I would still want to organize our first event in Bali. Um, but we started looking for a European chapter, and yeah, I have, apart from my wife being Estonian, I've also went there to see venues, and the whole e-residency program has been amazing. They've been a annual sponsor of the conference, and the environment there like is very startup oriented, and people really enjoy the freedom lifestyle conversations. So I'm equally interested to just be there for that as well. And we are thinking of a European chapter eventually. So who knows? Maybe Estonia will become that place. But definitely, I like to. I think that's where I gravitate to, places with just more nomads.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, now that you've been surrounded by wild cards for so long, you can't just flush that down the toilet and not have it around you anymore. I think it's a bit addicting.
Yeah, totally. I do think that it's just become like such a big trend right now that it's not really unique, and probably like everywhere will be a place with remote workers. But I think the founding countries are always going to be leading the way, and I think I've seen some new programs that they have released in a digital nomad visa as well in Estonia, and yeah, I'm just like really curious to see what's happening in Europe, and being close to Portugal as well and Spain, and I just yeah, I want to be part of that remote work culture as well. So yeah, I'm super excited to move there.
Yeah, and are there any aspects of you that are like ready to, like, is there something about Europe in particular that you're excited to come back to? Like I asked that question because I've mentioned this before on this show, but like I always kind of had like an infatuation with Europe, the history and the architecture, and for me one of the big things is just being able to like cross a border and be in a whole different world, like you cross from France into Italy, and it's just like, oh, all of a sudden the language changes, the food changes, the history changes, the architecture, and that's just mind blowing to me. So is there something about Europe that kind of calls you back? Because the world's your oyster, you could go wherever you wanted, but and I know your wife's from Estonia, and you've got roots in Europe as well, but is there any aspect of it that's sort of nostalgic and sort of pulling you back in this way? Because Bali's obviously a pretty glamorous spot to live, so you're leaving for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a completely different life, I guess, where Bali spoils us quite a bit. But what's attracting us there, it's definitely like the change of climates. It's 35 degrees in Bali all year round, every day. And it's like sometimes a little bit of rain, sometimes a little bit of this. I love snowboarding. I love the change of seasons. I definitely love, hanging out in the expat culture here more than the Indonesian culture. I mean, I love the Indonesian culture, but nevertheless, we're just so far away from, me being Caucasian and them being here on the equator, and I still feel very much like an outsider here, and that's something that will never be taken away. Even if I spent like 50 years of my life here, I'll never be Balinese. But so in Europe, I kind of feel like I'm more in my plate and more like surrounded by people, that similar kind of thinking. And so the other aspect of it is obviously my family. They live in the UK, and I just want to see them more often. I think probably food is a big one as well for us. Like now you have more and more European products here, like first world products. Before you can get cheese or like wine here in Bali, but all of this is available now. But food is a big one for us. We're like big foodies, me and my wife. So we are really always talking like, oh, when we move to Europe, like we're gonna go to the supermarket and we're gonna buy this like ricotta cheese and like like organic tomatoes and stuff like that. It's quite difficult to get here. Um, yeah, but last boring reason is actually the time zone, because the conference running remote is very much North American focused, as it has become, and all of my calls are either like 6 a.m. or they are like at 9 p.m. And so basically I'm working all day long, because I may have some time in between, but I'm still thinking about work. So I kind of like want to organize my life a little bit better so that then I can have my work hours and have that overlap with the US, when I can also spend time, with my family in the evening, and not just spend time in front of the computer all day long. So it's a big one.
Yeah, some really practical reasons to make a change, and also it sounds like it's change is fun. Like change is exciting. Being in a new place, new group of people, calling a new place home, and getting settled in can be pretty a whole new adventure in and of itself. So I look forward to that for you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I love moving places, and I really feel super hungry for a new place. Like I just feel like I really need to move to a new place, and you can have as much as you want chocolate cake, but after a while it gets boring, and I mean you want a lemon tart and something similar.
That's a perfect analogy. I realized we're coming up on the time that I had reserved with you here, so I'm going to let you get going in a second. I realized there were a couple things that I didn't really ask, so just kind of like rapid fire real quick. How important is the Indonesian, being able to speak the local language from your perspective? Obviously, you want to respect the locals, but for someone who may be thinking, oh, well, I'm kind of scared to go to Bali because I don't speak Indonesian. What would you advise them in that regard?
I mean, the most Balinese in tourist areas speak English, so you won't have an issue of understanding each other. But your life becomes easier if you are able to just say a few words, and even like hello and thank you and please. You will just get sort of like a different approach, and people really really appreciate that and respect that. So languages, and it's very easy to learn. It's extremely easy to learn. They don't have any tenses, and you could just it's like a puzzle of you can just put words together and it somehow all makes sense. So it doesn't have these tenses, or if it's past or future, it's almost the same way you say that. So yeah, I'd recommend learning a few, but it's not that important.
Okay, all right, good to know. And something else that I'm just curious about is you mentioned like Balinese multiple times. Like, is there a distinct like I think this happens with island states a lot of times. They kind of develop their own distinct culture and identity, and maybe don't feel super connected to the mainland. I wonder if at all that's the case with Bali. Like, do they kind of see themselves as like separate from Indonesia, or are they Indonesian as much as they are Balinese?
No, they do feel separate, and I think that they even had like discussions of just becoming a sovereign state. The Balinese are very well known for carving and like craftsmanship, so they know that they're like celebrity level when they get invited to other islands to teach them, and so they know they have a special spot here, and they're not giving it up for that. So I think it's a very strong identity for the Balinese, and of course they love the president, and they consider themselves Indonesian, but it's extremely strong difference on how they see themselves in the world as well.
Yeah, I kind of had that perception, and I've been to some other places around the world where it's like, yeah, we're a part of this country, but we really see ourselves more as our island state or whatever. There's certain states in the U.S. There's certain parts of countries even here in Europe that really identify first with their local region. So that's always really interesting. Awesome. Well, I will. I'm gonna just turn it over to you for one last comment, if you don't mind, and then we'll wrap it up. Is if someone were to be planning a semi-permanent move to Bali, they're not just showing up as a tourist, they want to go and kind of stay for a while.
what one piece of advice would you give them as they're planning for it, or just wrapping their mind around it, or when they arrive? Is there anything you would leave them with as we close out here to kind of keep in mind?
Yeah, like explore the culture when you get here, and just don't get too stuck up with, hanging out with the same kind of people you would back home. And it's really it's a world of wonders here. So deep dive and show some respect to locals as a foreigner. Take care of the environment as you do so. Do attempt to learn something in the language as well. I think in terms of just don't have any expectations. Expect like that whatever you plan will go differently. So just make as less plans as possible. And Bali is the kind of place that will just show you the way. So try to be open to go with the flow and lean beyond your age. And once you put yourself out there, life is fairly generous. So if you do the right things, Bali can be opening an amazing phase in your life for a year or however long you're coming here.
Oh, that's super well said. Perfect way to close this out. Thank you so much, Egor. I learned so much in this conversation about Bali, and I'm really hoping I finally get around to visiting sometime soon, hopefully before you leave. But if not, then you'll be a little bit closer to me here in Europe. So, and Estonia is another place I need to get to. So we'll cross paths eventually anyway. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun.
Total pleasure, Chase. You're always welcome here. My house is open. You have a place to stay now. And I just love talking about Bali. Thanks a lot for bringing me on the show for an opportunity to share about how beautiful this place is. And I hope that more people will get to discover it in a responsible way. But I wish you all the best and a great day. And thanks a lot. And again, I can't wait to meet you in person.
Yeah, same. Thanks again, Egor. I think you did a great job selling Bali. I'm sure people are thinking, I got to go get there like right now. So if they weren't thinking that already, thanks again. We'll speak soon.
Speak soon. Bye, Chase.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.